The Pima County Board of Supervisors discussed Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos once again at their meeting today. It comes after growing concern regarding Nanos and the Pima County Sheriff's Department.
A 22-page legal filing. This response came from a lawyer, not the sheriff himself, to address a question Nanos previously answered under federal oath. While the attorney claims his client misunderstood the query, official employment records from out of state tell a different story. Tonight, we analyze every admission in that letter Nanos refused to deliver personally, including the critical sentence the board still lacked. Ignore the man, the missing woman, and the surrounding scandal for a moment. Look strictly at the paper trail. It begins with a single document that appeared in a Pima County office on a Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock sharp. Dated April 21, 2026, the file contains 12 pages of text and 10 exhibit pages, totaling 22 in all. A single signature sits at the bottom, but it belongs to an attorney, not to Sheriff Chris Nanos himself. That missing name is a warning the sheriff was ordered by a unanimous board to answer for his conduct. He was tasked with providing sworn statements regarding his office, yet he chose not to pen the response. Now, the board may vote again, potentially ruling that the sheriff failed to provide any meaningful answers to their inquiries. Noncompliance with ARS Section 1-253 could trigger the formal process for his potential removal from office. When the deadline arrived, Nanos was absent, refusing to face the microphone or address the hearing room in person. There was no oath taken in public. Instead, he delegated the entire legal defense to his attorney on paper. This tactical silence was a deliberate choice by a man whose previous deposition testimony forced the board to demand transparency. The first major development in the letter is an admission now circulating through every major news outlet in the region. It confirms that Sheriff Nanos was actually suspended, though it did not happen during his tenure at Pima County. The incident occurred over 40 years ago, long before his 4-decade career in Arizona began, while he was a young officer. While serving at the El Paso Police Department in Texas, he faced discipline his lawyer now claims is ancient history. The defense argues these Texas years are irrelevant, using strategic language to distance the sheriff from his early record. Regardless of the spin, that admission is now signed, filed, and officially documented with the county clerk. This timing is critical. 5 months before this letter, the sheriff gave a very different answer under sworn testimony. When asked directly about previous suspensions, Nanos replied with one definitive word. The word was no. That exchange occurred in December 2025 during a formal federal deposition for a high-profile civil rights case. The case is a First Amendment lawsuit brought against Nanos by Aaron Cross, a sergeant within his own department. As president of the Pima County Deputies Organization, Cross represents nearly 300 sworn law enforcement officers inside the agency. During the 2024 sheriff's race, Cross found himself placed on administrative leave as political tensions within the department spiked. Internal Affairs targeted Cross for campaigning for Nanos' rival, Heather Lappin, specifically because of the attire he wore. Command staff alleged his clothing mimicked an official uniform, prompting Cross to file his federal retaliation lawsuit. He claims the department retaliated against his protected political speech, a case that remains active in the federal court system. The deposition from that suit sparked this current firestorm, creating a transcript that Nanos' attorney is now desperately trying to explain. When counsel asked if he had ever faced discipline during his law enforcement career, the sheriff answered yes. But when the questioning narrowed to whether that discipline ever included a suspension, the narrative shifted immediately. Nanos said no. Observers call the response problematic, yet the sheriff maintains these statements were never actually under oath. The supervisor's primary goal was to obtain sworn testimony from the sheriff to resolve these glaring inconsistencies once and for all. He admitted to general discipline but specifically denied a suspension. Those contradictions are now etched permanently into the federal transcript. Both statements were sworn and remain material to the First Amendment suit regarding the disciplinary culture inside the PCSD. 4 months later, the sheriff's own lawyer drafted a letter, authorized by Nanos himself, for submission to the county board. That letter confirmed the truth. Nanos had indeed been suspended multiple times during his early career at the El Paso Police. The first paragraph of the filing contains this stark admission, and once that statement is documented in writing, everything changes. Coming from his authorized counsel, this new information makes the sheriff's previous sworn testimony impossible to defend. The defense must now backtrack or reframe the narrative, and this letter attempts to do exactly that. We will examine how the sheriff addressed the media in February 2026, specifically regarding the case of Nancy Guthrie. He discussed the disappearance, her vital medication, and FBI cooperation, but the board notes one sentence is still missing. He showcased his department's loyalty through his own voice and face, performing for the lenses as if his very soul depended on it. This performance wasn't just for the media, it was for an 84-year-old woman's family who still didn't know if she was alive. By April, he hid behind a lawyer when facing perjury allegations, so if you're following this investigation, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more updates. The paper trail is expanding through hearings and official filings, and we drop a new update here the moment a fresh document hits the record. Subscribing keeps you in this loop, while the bell ensures you get the alert before the mainstream news cycle manages to bury the lead. The admissions in that letter serve as the entry point, but it cannot erase the immense pressure that forced those truths out. This is where the trajectory shifts toward the El Paso personnel file, which has transformed from a local secret into a national scandal. The attorney isn't shouting into the void here. He is building a permanent, undeniable legal record. Starting in March 2026, the Arizona Republic secured the complete personnel file for Chris Nanos from the El Paso Police Department in Texas. 93 pages of evidence cover his entire Texas career from 1976 to 1982, documenting every move he made in law enforcement. The Republic's investigative reporting has now forced that entire file into the light. Every major network, from Fox News to Newsweek and the Tucson Sentinel, is now scrutinizing the exact same set of underlying documents to find the truth. Before the scandals, the file shows formal recognition. In 1979, just 3 years into his El Paso tenure, the department honored Nanos for saving his partner's life during an active shift. 1 year later, in 1980, he earned the title of Officer of the Year for the entire department. These aren't participation trophies, because a police department never hands out its highest annual award to an officer by pure accident. Those accolades live in the same file the attorney is holding, and they belong in this narrative right next to every other entry found within those 93 pages. Any review of his career that ignores these achievements is fundamentally dishonest and incomplete. The file also exposes a clear pattern emerging between July 1979 and June 1982, a violent 3-year window in his tenure. Internal records show Nanos was suspended 8 separate times, proving this wasn't just a single isolated incident or accusation. 8 documented suspensions occurred across multiple supervisors and various categories over several years of active duty. The Officer of the Year award is dated 1980, meaning the suspension pattern was happening simultaneously with his professional rise. By the final summer of his service, he had racked up approximately 32 days of strictly disciplinary suspension time. When you add the 3 instances of leave without pay, the total time Nanos spent off the force for misconduct continues to climb. That cumulative total reaches 37 days, and both figures are hard-coded into the official department personnel file. 32 days of pure suspension, 37 total days removed from duty for documented disciplinary failures. The longest of those 8 incidents resulted in a 15-day suspension issued in March of 1982. The department labeled it as excessive force, but that clinical term hid the brutal reality until the incident report finally became public. Records from 2026 show Nanos and other units responded to a possible aggravated robbery at an El Paso Circle K convenience store that night. The formal report describes the suspects as both heavily intoxicated and completely uncooperative. During the arrest, one suspect was forced into handcuffs, and once the man was restrained with his wrists behind his back, he was officially in the custody of the law. Nanos then struck the man in the head with a flashlight, causing significant bleeding. The suspect required hospital admission, and now local and national media are hammering Nanos over the brutal facts of this specific encounter. The core issue is that he physically assaulted a handcuffed man so severely that the victim required immediate emergency hospital care. Pima County Supervisor Matt Hines read this internal affairs file into the public record during a board meeting in March of 2026. Hines specifically described the injuries as severe enough to require intensive care treatment. A restrained man, bludgeoned with a flashlight by the very officers sworn to protect him, ended up hospitalized. These 4 critical facts are verified by the personnel file, the suspension notice, and recent investigative reporting. A 5th fact remains. Nanos was never indicted for the assault, but all 5 points are documented and undisputed in the attorney's formal letter. The letter does not deny the 8 suspensions. The letter never denies the March 1982 incident or the fact that the suspect was hospitalized. No one can walk back these findings because the signed and dated pages are a matter of record. These documents emerged from Texas on official letterhead 4 decades before anyone in Tucson even thought to question his past conduct. The other suspensions require scrutiny because this wasn't a one-time lapse, as 2 of the 8 were for chronic tardiness. One followed an incident where undercover officers caught Nanos gambling during a pool game while off duty, and another was for insubordination. Records further cite dereliction of duty, falsified statements, and a specific profanity-laced insult directed toward women. One entry details Nanos threatening physical harm against a witness who filed a formal disciplinary complaint against him. These categories appear in the file, recorded with a clinical lack of embellishment as the official log stands. The final entry, dated July 21st, 1982, documents Nanos's abrupt departure from the El Paso Police Department. The employer's language on that 1982 form is explicit. Resignation in lieu of termination, following specific allegations of insubordination and inefficiency. Records confirm a 15-day suspension following that incident. That phrase, resignation in lieu of termination, is the exact language used in 1982 by the very people who worked alongside Nanos at the time. It is not a summary. It is the official record. Now, 44 years later, an attorney's letter contests that framing. This new letter recharacterizes the resignation as following a mere 3-day suspension recommendation for insubordination stemming from a dispute with a supervisor regarding vehicle towing protocols. Nanos reportedly appealed that recommendation to the police chief, lost, and then resigned rather than accept the penalty. 2 conflicting accounts now sit on the table. The 1982 language stands on its own paper, while the 2026 attorney stands on his. Resignation in lieu of termination suggests an employee facing immediate firing. Resigning over a 3-day suspension implies a career dispute over a far lighter penalty. These are vastly different stories, and the viewer must weigh the evidence. There is one further layer here. When Nanos applied to the Pima County Sheriff's Department, his resume listed his El Paso tenure as ending in 1984, 2 years after his actual departure. His resume also listed his department promotion to captain as 2007, though the actual year was 2009. In March of 2026, a spokesperson described these discrepancies as simple administrative errors. The attorney's letter further claims that the department's website error was corrected immediately after Nanos was alerted. Both versions are on record, as are the original inaccuracies. These are hard facts the letter cannot erase. 8 suspensions, 32 to 37 days, 1 hospitalized man, 2 commendations, 1 resignation with conflicting labels, and 2 resume discrepancies. It is a career whose initial chapter now includes written concessions of disciplinary actions from his own attorney actions. The sheriff previously denied under oath. This was not a simple lie about work experience. It occurred during a recent lawsuit. He was under oath when he falsified his professional history. If you value this level of deep investigative detail, hit the like button. It takes 1 second and signals the algorithm to push this careful reporting to more viewers who need to see it. Every thumbs up helps this specific investigation reach more eyes the moment the next filing arrives. What the letter actually contests and how it attempts to do so remains our next forensic anatomy lesson. Whatever the letter cannot flatly deny, it attempts to contextualize. This 12-page document executes 3 distinct tactical moves to defend that December deposition answer. Each move serves a specific legal purpose and deserves careful scrutiny. Move 1. The scope move. The letter asserts Nanos was never suspended during his service with the Pima County Sheriff's Department. While that specific statement is technically accurate, his 4 decades at the department, starting as a corrections officer in 1984 and becoming sheriff in 2015, show no official suspensions. Recorded suspensions. The letter utilizes language from the April 21st filing to claim that the Pima County record is 100% correct. That might be technically true, but it is also not what the original question actually asked. The inquiry was not limited to Pima County. In plain English, the question asked if Nanos had ever received any suspension as a law enforcement officer, not just as a Pima County employee and not just in Arizona. Period. His career began in 1976 at the El Paso Police Department. The scope of the question mapped perfectly to his entire career. The letter scope move narrows that inquiry to only one chapter of his history, asking the reader to believe that this narrowing was implied during the original exchange. Move 2. The context move. The letter argues that the deposition questions surrounding the suspension inquiry specifically concerned the Arizona Peace Officers' Bill of Rights, a state statute applying only to officers employed within Arizona. The filing reasons that Nanos understood the question was limited due to these statutory references. In other words, while the question was phrased broadly, the surrounding conversational context supposedly narrowed it. Nanos, according to the letter, provided his answer within that narrower frame in good faith. However, opposing counsel's phrasing was not narrow, and a deposition witness is strictly bound by he is judged by the answer he actually provides, not the private internal framework he constructed for himself. And this specific context move hinges on whether any reasonable observer believes a federal deposition question is narrowed by the surrounding subject matter of the hearing, especially when the literal phrasing lacks limiting language and the witness provides a response without ever requesting clarification from the examiner. Then comes move 3, the knowledge move, which stands as the absolute core of this entire defensive strategy. The letter includes a critical sentence regarding events following the deposition, claiming Nanos realized his error once the session had ended. He supposedly realized he had misinterpreted the question and contacted his lawyer, making that single sentence a piece of preemptive legal maneuvering. Federal perjury charges under Title 18, Section 1621 mandate that any false statement must be delivered with full knowledge. Proving intentional knowledge remains the most fiercely litigated point in any perjury prosecution. When a witness informs counsel of a misunderstanding immediately following their testimony, they are creating a paper trail of their supposed intent. This written record functions as a protective shield against the accusation that their inaccurate testimony was actually a knowing deception. That sentence is not mere storytelling, it is pure defense architecture and the primary load-bearing beam supporting his entire legal position. These represent the 3 core moves: scope, context, and knowledge, which together form the framework for contesting that December deposition answer. Remove just one pillar, and the entire defense begins to crumble. If you remove 2, rebutting the claim of a knowingly false statement becomes nearly impossible for the legal team. This document does far more than answer the board. It proactively constructs a perjury defense for a potential criminal proceeding on paper. Furthermore, the letter disputes how that 1982 El Paso resignation was characterized during our earlier analysis of the timeline. Records from 1982 describe the exit as a resignation in lieu of termination. The 2026 attorney letter claims it was a resignation over a mere 3-day suspension, creating 2 fundamentally incompatible accounts. While the 1982 record is contemporaneous, the recent letter is purely retrospective, leaving the viewer to weigh both conflicting versions. A final dispute appears in the opening pages, where the letter raises a formal objection against the validity of the board inquiry. It frames the statutory questioning as an overly broad fishing expedition, arguing that conduct from 40 years ago in a different state lacks a rational connection to current duties, though managing 40 years of history spanning 6 decades remains a difficult task for anyone. Paperwork gets disorganized and specific dates can easily slip through the cracks over time. Even so, the sheriff is providing a response, which his attorney frames as an act of genuine cooperation with the authorities. We must analyze that opening objection because the letter is doing more than just answering simple questions from the board. It simultaneously disputes the very authority of the board to ask those questions, presenting 2 distinct legal postures within a single document. Both arguments are active, and the union president, the plaintiff in this First Amendment battle, has already provided public testimony on the matter. He spoke openly about the implications of hiding a disciplinary history that spans over 40 years. During the March 24th meeting, Sergeant Aaron Cross informed the supervisors that Nanos is fundamentally unfit to wear the uniform. He labeled the concealment as fraud, arguing that 4 decades of silence did not erase the deception, it only made it worse. Those scathing remarks were entered into the official Pima County public record during that very same Board of Supervisors session. The board subsequently voted unanimously to demand sworn testimony, but once the attorney letter arrived on April 21st, everything shifted. When Fox News sought his reaction, Cross delivered a blunt forward assessment of the document. It is chock full of lies. However, his most stinging observation was procedural. The letter is not sworn, yet the board explicitly demanded testimony under oath. Instead of an oath, they received a lawyer's signature on a page, and that procedural gap is exactly why this conflict continues. Next, we will examine the specific law invoked by the board, a statute that actually predates the very existence of Arizona itself. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Does this misunderstood the question defense seem credible given the specific timing of the inquiry? Remember, this happened on the record during a federal deposition for a retaliation lawsuit focused squarely on the department disciplinary culture. Our community follows this case closely through these comment sections, so share your perspective while keeping the conversation civil and respectful. The fact that the letter is not sworn constitutes the entirety of the board procedural grievance regarding this specific filing. This is exactly why the document fails to satisfy the board requirements, regardless of its length or the care taken in its writing. The board demanded a very specific legal instrument when they voted unanimously on April 7, 2026, to take action. They invoked a section of Arizona law so ancient it dates back to the era when the region was still a federal territory. Arizona gained statehood in 1912, meaning the statute utilized by the board is actually older than the state of Arizona itself. Arizona joined the Union in 1912, and the specific law they leveraged predates the existence of that very state government. Arizona Revised Statutes, Title 11, Section 253, Subsection A. This provision still lives in the modern Arizona Code. It carries surgical weight, granting a county board the power to demand sworn reports from any officer, including the sheriff. Should that officer refuse the demand, the board holds the statutory authority to declare that office vacant. It is a high-stakes protocol. This specific removal lever was forged into Arizona law before statehood even existed. The April 7th vote was entirely nonpartisan. Every supervisor on the board, regardless of their political party, voted yes. District 2 Supervisor Matt Hines placed the item. Hines is a consistent critic of Sheriff Chris Nanos. District 3 Supervisor Jen Allen presided over the intense board proceedings. The supervisors retreated into an executive session for 4.5 hours, then emerged to cast their final, decisive, public vote. That unanimity is critical because it destroys the narrative that this inquiry is a one-sided partisan operation. Instead, we see a county government acting with collective force under a territorial-era law that has never been used like this. The board set a deadline of 10 business days. That clock ended at the next meeting on April 21st. The sheriff had exactly 10 business days to produce sworn answers, either delivered in person or submitted in writing. The countdown began the second the motion passed. What finally reached the clerk office on April 21st was a formal attorney letter. It was 22 pages long. Counsel signed it, but the sheriff did not. There was no sworn statement and no notarized affidavit. The following day, April 22nd, the board convened in public to receive the response. Pima County Administrator Jan Lesher stepped out. When she returned to the chambers, Lesher reported for the record that the attorney response had officially been delivered. She confirmed the documents were distributed to the supervisors. Then, she stated plainly that she had not yet read the material. That level of blunt honesty from the top administrator signaled exactly how this letter would be received by the board. It was a document requiring forensic review, not a submission that had clearly satisfied the board's specific legal demands. Supervisor Steve Christie then moved to release the entire 22-page response to the public and waive all legal privilege. Christie wanted full transparency. His motion, however, failed instantly because not one other supervisor was willing to second it. Without a second, the motion died on the floor. The board then voted to delay any public discussion of the sheriff response. The next discussion is set for May. Outlets are reporting either May 12th or May 26th for the next regular meeting. This timeline shifted after Supervisor Hines requested a further delay to the agenda. Meanwhile, the sheriff himself was notably absent. Department spokesperson Angelica Carrillo issued a statement claiming that Nanos, through his counsel, had fully complied with the board demand. The department claimed the matter involved ongoing civil litigation and refused to provide further comment to the press or public. The chair at the department podium remained empty. The chair in the hearing room where the sheriff could have testified stayed empty. Nanos could have raised his right hand and testified under oath. He chose not to show up. Consider the sequence of events. A unanimous board, a territorial-era statute, a hard demand for sworn answers, a 10-business-day countdown clock, a 22-page letter, and exhibits signed only by a lawyer without a single sworn attestation from the witness himself, a postponement, no testimony, and a motion for public release that died for lack of a second. This is a stalemate. The letter certainly addressed the questions, but it did not provide answers under the weight of an oath as the law requires. This mismatch is the core of the current standoff. It is not a minor procedural technicality. It is a legal failure. If you know anyone following this criminal inquiry, share this video with them. Most news outlets are missing the point. They report that the sheriff answered the board. They are ignoring what the Arizona statute actually demands of him. A lawyer letter is not the instrument named in the law. Send this to one person who is tracking this investigation closely. Use the share button now. The options remaining for the Board of Supervisors are becoming increasingly narrow as the deadline passes. They could accept the letter, which is unlikely given the unanimous April 7th vote. They could compel his testimony in person. The board could hold a formal hearing, subpoena records, or refer the perjury question to the county attorney for an independent review. They could even invoke the removal clause. That requires a separate vote and follows a very specific set of legal guardrails. Every tactical path is still available. None are automatic. All require another public vote from the same board that acted once before. That initial unanimous vote was not the end. The lawyer letter did not close the case. It simply opened the next phase. Beyond what the letter contests or admits, it cannot protect one thing. The subject of this entire investigation is Nancy Guthrie. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is the mother of Today Show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie. On the evening of January 31st, 2026, a family member dropped her off at her Tucson home around 9:45. Relative dropped her off at her residence in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson around 9:45 following dinner. She was reported missing the next day, a Sunday, when she failed to show up at a friend's house for an online church service. Investigators believe she was snatched from her own home. Drops of her blood were discovered right there on her front porch, a forensic detail confirmed by the sheriff. On February 10th, the FBI finally went public with home surveillance footage pulled from a Nest doorbell camera with Google's assistance. In the video, we see a masked figure wearing gloves and carrying a 25-liter Ozark trail pack with a visible holstered sidearm approaching the residence, then tampering with the camera lens. That clip remains the most prominent piece of public evidence in this investigation. That suspect remains unidentified. The case stays active, but the woman is still gone. Her family is still out there waiting. And the department leading this hunt is led by a man whose attorney just filed 22 pages regarding his disciplinary record. This is what the letter cannot shield, because that document, regardless of how effective it works as a legal tool, cannot conjure more hours for a commander's week. It cannot force his focus back onto this missing person's case. It cannot undo the grueling days and weekends his staff burned away preparing it to meet a strict statutory deadline. Every single page of that filing stole hours from somewhere else. The Guthrie investigation is exactly where those hours went. Jennifer Coffindaffer, a retired FBI special agent tracking the Guthrie case, told Newsweek in April about the growing fallout. She claimed the intense scrutiny on Sheriff Nanos amounted to what she called, quite literally, an absolute distraction. Her operational point was sharp. Answering the board's demand for sworn testimony, she noted, would eat up critical department time, would drain the sheriff's schedule and his staff's focus for days, likely through weekends. Every hour of that preparation counts. Is an hour stolen from the search for Nancy? She wasn't alleging departmental misconduct in the actual Guthrie investigation itself. She was observing from federal experience how command bandwidth evaporates when a leader is under direct legal fire. But there's another voice, one far closer to the department itself, and his perspective is even more damning. Dr. Richard Carmona, a 30-year veteran of the Pima County Sheriff's Department and a former United States Surgeon General, told Fox 10 Phoenix that, in his view, Nanos has completely lost his way regarding the Guthrie disappearance. Carmona's deep credentials make him nearly impossible to ignore. He isn't some outside critic or a political opportunist. He isn't a disgruntled employee either. He's a physician, a former federal officer, and a career veteran of this department. When a 30-year veteran says publicly that the current commander has lost his way, it isn't just a headline. That isn't clickbait for social media. That's a clinical, professional assessment delivered on the record by an expert. One specific operational choice in the Guthrie case has now surfaced publicly, and it carries significant weight. A hair sample found at Nancy Guthrie's home, labeled as potentially significant evidence, was handled in a very specific way. Pima County sent that sample to a private lab in Florida instead of the FBI's forensic laboratory. This happened even though the FBI had requested 2 months earlier to process the sample using their own facilities. Once the sample finally reached the Bureau, the FBI Assistant Director for Public Affairs, Ben Williamson, went on the offensive. He posted publicly that the Bureau had asked for that test 2 months prior using the exact same technology. He emphasized that the sheriff chose a private lab instead of federal resources. That post was anything but a whisper. This was a senior FBI official publicly calling out a local routing decision. I am not saying the lab choice was wrong. I'm saying the commander whose credibility is now under oath is the same man who made that forensic call. Those are two facts sitting side by side. It is up to you to decide if they are connected. If you know anyone searching for Nancy Guthrie or following the tip lines, send this video to them immediately. The massive gap between public perception of this search and the reality of the commander running it is growing. Closing that information gap is vital. Share this video with just one person right now to spread the word. Here's where the case stands. The combined reward from the family and the FBI has climbed to a massive amount. It currently sits at $1.2 million. By late February, the FBI had processed 23,000 tips. More than 750 of those leads were deemed credible. The family also donated $500,000. This donation went to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. These are the hard numbers of the investigation. 81 days have passed. None of this work pauses while the sheriff's legal team fights. Every document has consequences. Those 22 pages do exactly that. What the letter buys is a temporary reprieve from the April 21st deadline. The response is in. The clock on that specific legal requirement has stopped. On that narrow point, the strategy worked. This correspondence achieved its objective, effectively unlocking every procedural avenue currently available to the board members. One unqualified statement within these pages takes precedence over everything else. No official perjury charges have been filed. To be precise, Chris Nanos faces no criminal perjury indictment from any federal prosecutor at this time. Currently, these perjury claims remain mere allegations brought forward by a county board utilizing its formal oversight powers. This has not escalated into a criminal prosecution yet, a distinction that remains absolutely critical for understanding this case. Accusations are not indictments, and board votes aren't prosecutions, but federal perjury specifically requires 4 distinct legal elements. These are oath, statement, materiality, and knowledge of falsity. The first 2 are already recorded in the official transcript. While materiality is subject to debate, the specific line of questioning bore directly upon the lawsuit's disciplinary claims. The primary battleground is the element of knowledge, which is exactly why this letter was strategically drafted for defense. Claims that Nanos eventually recognized his error and alerted his counsel serve as the core defense embedded in this document. This preemptive move occurred months before any prosecutor reviewed the file, and the document further cites a specific letter. Dated March 11th, this correspondence from the former Arizona U.S. Attorney confirms that the Department of Justice declined action. They opted against launching a federal criminal investigation into allegations surrounding the 2024 election cycle. Lacking a federal predicate, this exhibit focuses solely on election year suspensions rather than addressing the perjury matter. That specific issue now rests with the board, serving as a necessary component in the complete analysis of this document. When assessing the sheriff's current legal standing, the board's upcoming session will dictate which procedural door opens next. Whether scheduled for May 12th or May 26th, the available options range from sworn testimony to formal criminal referrals. Action could involve a referral to the Pima County Attorney or trigger the specific removal clause within the governing statute. No single outcome is guaranteed, yet each path forward requires a formal vote, a public process, and a permanent record. The foundational civil lawsuit, Cross v. Nanos, proceeds through federal district court independent of any decisions made by the board. Legal discovery in that litigation yielded the deposition transcript that ignited this firestorm, and further evidence may still emerge. Should the case fail to reach a settlement, a trial will serve as the next arena to test Nanos' testimony. This upcoming confrontation will happen before a jury instead of a board. Sheriff Nanos originally took office in July 2015. Initially appointed to finish a predecessor's term, he secured subsequent election victories and currently has 3 years left in office. A sheriff confronting perjury accusations during an active election cycle is a stark political reality, regardless of partisan leanings. These events converge simultaneously with the board's meeting schedule and the strict discovery deadlines of the federal civil suit. Despite the written response, the sheriff remains silent. Meanwhile, an 84-year-old has been missing since January 31st. The family has offered a $1 million reward, supplemented by a $100,000 reward from the FBI. Crime Stoppers added $102,000, bringing the total to $1.2 million. 81 days have passed without answers, even as the sheriff's own legal counsel confirmed he had been placed on suspension. Yet the sheriff denied this under oath last December. Both statements cannot be true, and the Texas records effectively settle it. Records don't determine the weight of a sworn deposition answer, which is precisely the clarification the board is now seeking. Officials want the sheriff to provide sworn testimony personally rather than relying on a lawyer or 22 pages of documentation. An attorney cannot substitute for this level of personal accountability while a Tucson family continues waiting for their missing mother. As investigators monitor the tip lines, a formal letter signed by a lawyer waits on a desk for further scrutiny. The document sits inside a county building, awaiting a future board meeting that has not yet appeared on any calendar. We will provide live updates the moment the board casts its vote, so ensure you subscribe before leaving this video. This remains your quickest source for information, and any FBI tips should be directed to 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department directly at 520-351-4900. Alternatively, submissions are accepted online at tips.fbi.gov. Every lead is logged and thoroughly investigated. The commander's defensive legal strategy remains firm.